The ocean had always been Ava Sinclair's true home, a vast and mysterious world she had dedicated her life to protecting. As a renowned marine biologist and conservationist, she had spent years studying the delicate ecosystems of coral reefs, advocating for sustainable practices and preserving historically significant marine artifacts. Her passion was more than just academic, it was deeply personal. Every artifact in her private collection, from ancient whale bones to fossilized coral structures, held a story of survival and evolution, representing the fragile balance of marine life. Ava lived in a modern eco-villa overlooking the pristine waters of Sydney, Australia, a space filled with oceanic relics, deep-sea fossils, and handcrafted artifacts gifted by indigenous communities. It wasn't just a house, it was a testament to the wonders of the sea, a sanctuary where she could escape the world's chaos and surround herself with the things that truly mattered. But not everyone shared her reverence for the ocean. Ethan Caldwell, her husband, was a powerful CEO in the luxury resort industry, a man whose charm and ambition had once captivated Ava. He had built a fortune on beachfront developments, high-end tourism, and exclusive private islands, expanding his empire across the Pacific. At first, Ava admired his confidence and drive, believing their worlds could coexist. Her mission to protect marine life, and his desire to build paradise on Earth. But over time, she began to see the cracks in his vision. Ethan didn't care about sustainability, conservation, or ethical preservation. To him, the ocean was a business opportunity, not a living, breathing entity worth protecting. They had fought over his reckless developments before, but Ava never imagined just how far he would go. When the Australian Marine Conservation Society invited her on a 3-week research expedition to study coral bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef, she eagerly accepted. It was a chance to contribute to a critical study while stepping away from the rising tensions in her marriage. She had no idea that in her absence, Ethan was about to betray her in the worst way possible. When she left, her priceless collection was still intact, a lifetime of discoveries carefully preserved. But when she returned, the heart of her home had been hollowed out, her collection gone without a trace. And the man she once trusted stood before her, smug and unapologetic, ready to explain why he had just sold away her life's work. The moment Ava Sinclair stepped into her home, she sensed something was wrong. The air felt hollow. The warmth that usually greeted her after a long trip was replaced by an eerie emptiness. As she wheeled her suitcase inside, her eyes flickered to the large display shelves lining the walls of her living room, but they were bare. The ancient whale vertebrae, the fossilized corals, the centuries-old shipwreck artifacts she had recovered and preserved with painstaking care, all gone. Her heart pounded in her chest, confusion giving way to a sharp, rising panic. She rushed from room to room, opening drawers, peering into display cases, searching for something, anything that hadn't been touched. But there was nothing left. The walls of her home, once a museum of the ocean's rich history, were now stripped clean. Then came the sound of footsteps behind her. Ethan, her husband, stood in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing a smirk that sent a chill down her spine. "You're back early," he said casually, as if nothing had happened. Ava's breath caught in her throat. "Where is it?" she demanded, her voice trembling with the sheer effort it took to remain calm. Ethan didn't flinch. "I sold it," he replied, the words so nonchalant it made her stomach turn. Ava blinked as if she had misheard. "You what?" The words barely escaped her lips before the full weight of his betrayal hit her. "My collection. My research. You sold it?" Ethan shrugged, stepping further into the room. "It was just sitting here, Ava, gathering dust. Meanwhile, I had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to fund the expansion of our Bora Bora resort. You should be thanking me, really." Ava felt physically ill. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a violation. Those pieces weren't just valuable, they were irreplaceable fragments of marine history, some donated by scientists, others discovered through years of painstaking research dives. Some were gifts from indigenous communities entrusted to her for safekeeping. Ethan had turned them into nothing more than currency. She took a step forward, her fists clenched at her sides. You had no right. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. Oh, come on. You don't even know what's gone, do you? You collect so much junk. Who could keep track? His arrogance was unbearable. Ava's breathing was ragged as she forced herself to stay calm, but inside her mind was spiraling. She needed to think, to act, to fix this. Then, in a flash, she remembered something: the tracking devices. A month ago, after hearing reports of black market sales of rare marine artifacts, she had embedded micro GPS trackers into her most valuable pieces. If they were still active, she might have a chance to get them back. Ethan, still smirking, had no idea. He thought he had won, but the game had just begun. Ava stood frozen in the empty space that had once been her sanctuary, the room that had housed decades of marine history, painstakingly collected and preserved. Now, it was nothing more than an empty shell. The artifacts and relics that had once whispered stories of the ocean's past, now scattered somewhere in the hands of strangers. Or worse, locked away in the vault of some black market collector. The enormity of the betrayal pressed down on her like the crushing weight of the deep sea, her breath shallow as she tried to comprehend the reality of what Ethan had done. Her life's work. The more she thought about it, the more the ache in her chest turned into something sharper, something angrier. Ethan hadn't just sold some decorations, he had stolen history, dismantling years of research and conservation without a second thought. She could still hear his voice in her head, dripping with condescension and self-righteousness. You should be thanking me. Thanking him? For reducing her passion, her purpose to a business transaction? Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the empty display case. If she let herself spiral, she would drown in the anger, the heartbreak, the sheer helplessness of the situation. But she wasn't helpless. Not yet. With a deep breath, she pulled out her phone and opened an app few people knew she had, one she had installed as a precaution months ago after reading about a rise in illegal marine artifact sales. A map flickered to life on her screen, tiny red dots scattered across the city and beyond. Her heart pounded. The tracking devices, they were still active. She zoomed in, watching as signals blinked in real time. One of the artifacts, a rare fossilized coral species, was already in transit, heading toward a port in Hong Kong. Another, an ancient whale vertebra, had been delivered to a private storage facility in Sydney. Others were sitting in a high-end auction house downtown, most likely waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. Ava's fingers clenched around the phone. Ethan thought he had taken everything from her, that she would cry, scream, maybe threaten him with divorce, but ultimately do nothing. He didn't think she was capable of fighting back. He was wrong. She needed help and she needed it fast. Without hesitation, she dialed the one person she trusted to handle this kind of violation with the same fire she felt burning inside her. Dr. Celeste Harper. The voice on the other end answered, crisp and commanding, Ava's former mentor, a leading expert in marine archaeology, and one of the most connected figures in the conservation world. Celeste, Ava said, forcing herself to sound steady. I need your help. Ethan sold my collection, and I think he sold it to someone who deals in black market artifacts. A sharp intake of breath, then silence. Finally, Celeste spoke, her tone dark. Tell me everything. Ava exhaled, a new kind of determination settling in her bones. She had spent her life fighting to protect the ocean, its history, and its future. Now she was going to fight to get it all back. Ava didn't waste another second. She wasn't going to sit back and grieve while her life's work was paraded through black market auctions and sold off to unethical collectors. She had proof, she had a plan, and now she had allies. Dr. Celeste Harper, her former mentor and one of the most respected marine archaeologists in the world, had connections in conservation, law enforcement, and the International Art Crimes Unit. If anyone could help Ava navigate the tangled mess Ethan had created, it was her. But first, they needed more than just suspicion. They needed evidence. Ava met Celeste at a quiet oceanfront cafe in Sydney, her hands still shaking from the morning's revelations. She spread her phone on the table, the map of blinking red tracking dots glowing between them. "This is where my artifacts are right now," she said, pointing to each location. "One's already moving overseas, another's in a private storage facility here, and a few are in a high-end auction house downtown." Celeste narrowed her eyes at the screen. "We need to act fast. If they leave the country, it'll be nearly impossible to get them back." Ava had already thought of that. She had 3 key moves. Legal action. Celeste contacted Margot Lynn, an expert in international art law, to file an emergency injunction against the auction house. If they could prove the artifacts were obtained illegally, they could halt the sales. Law enforcement. Ava reached out to Detective Noah Lancaster, an investigator specializing in environmental crimes and illegal trading, who agreed to open an official case into Ethan's dealings. Tech and tracking. Ava turned to Jasper Reed, an old friend and digital forensic specialist who could trace financial transactions linked to the artifacts and track where Ethan had sent the money. They had to move fast. Detective Lancaster leaned back in his chair at the police station, scanning the evidence Ava had brought: emails, shipment receipts, and the tracking data from the stolen artifacts. He let out a slow whistle. "Your husband is in deep," he said. "Not just with your collection, but with fraudulent environmental permits and smuggling rare oceanic relics. If this pans out, we're looking at serious charges." Ava felt a surge of satisfaction, but forced herself to focus. "So, what's next?" "We get proof of an illegal sale," Lancaster said. "Once that happens, we have him. But I need you to be careful. If Ethan realizes what you're doing, he might try to cover his tracks." Ava's jaw tightened. Ethan was good at twisting the truth, at making himself look like the victim. He had done it before, using his charm and power to brush away scandals. But this time, he wouldn't get away with it. Ava wasn't just reclaiming her stolen artifacts. She was about to expose Ethan for everything he was. And the best part? He had no idea what was coming. Ava barely had time to breathe as the investigation kicked into high gear. The clock was ticking, and every second counted. If they didn't act fast, her stolen marine artifacts would disappear into the depths of the black market art world, never to be recovered. She had spent years collecting, preserving, and researching those relics, not for profit, not for display, but for the sake of scientific discovery and conservation. She wasn't about to let them slip away without a fight. Detective Noah Lancaster was already pulling financial records and flagged transactions connected to Ethan's resort company. Meanwhile, Jasper Reed, the digital forensic specialist, was tracking online sales and encrypted communications related to high-end artifact smuggling. His results were as shocking as they were damning. "Ethan's not just involved in selling your collection, Ava," Jasper said over the phone, his voice edged with urgency. "I've traced at least 4 other suspicious transactions involving illegally excavated marine relics. This isn't just a one-time betrayal. This is a full-blown smuggling operation." Ava's stomach turned. She had always suspected Ethan had questionable ethics, but this was criminal. The real breakthrough came when Celeste, using her academic connections, discovered one of Ava's artifacts, a rare whale vertebra listed for sale at an exclusive private auction in Singapore. The event, hosted by the infamous collector Victor Lau, was known for selling rare and often illegally acquired treasures to the ultra-wealthy. Lau was a legend in the underground art world, a man who had never been caught dealing in stolen goods, but had long been suspected of it. This was their chance. "We need to be there," Ava said firmly, gripping her phone as she stared at the auction listing on her laptop. "If we can get proof that my artifacts are being sold illegally, we'll have enough to take Ethan down." "That's a huge risk," Celeste warned. "Law's events are invitation only, and his clients are powerful people who don't take kindly to being exposed." But Ava didn't care. She wasn't about to let a corrupt billionaire and her treacherous husband profit off of her life's work. With Jasper's help, they hacked into the invitation list and secured Ava a spot under the alias of Margaret Drake, an anonymous collector from Monaco. The auction was set to take place at a lavish, high-secure private estate on the Singapore coast, where the world's richest collectors gathered to bid on history, no questions asked. The night of the auction, Ava walked through the grand entrance, heart pounding, her body wrapped in an elegant black gown that concealed a tiny recording device. Around her, champagne glasses clinked, expensive perfume mixed with cigar smoke, and conversations buzzed in multiple languages. It was a world she had never been a part of, a world where art and history were mere trophies, not legacies worth protecting. And then she saw it, her artifact, the whale vertebra fossil displayed in a glass case at the center of the exhibition hall with a starting bid of $500,000. Ava clenched her fists. This was it. But before she could act, a familiar voice sent a shiver down her spine. I was wondering when you'd show up. Ava turned sharply and came face to face with Ethan. His smirk was confident, dripping with arrogance. He leaned in, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You really don't know when to quit, do you? Ava's pulse raced, but she refused to back down. She lifted her chin and met his gaze head-on. Neither do you. He had no idea she was already 3 steps ahead. The evidence was piling up, the authorities were watching, and his time was running out. Ava had always known Ethan was arrogant, but standing face to face with him in the middle of a high-stakes black market auction, she saw something else. Desperation. He thought he was untouchable, that his charm and power could twist any situation in his favor, but he hadn't realized how much evidence was stacked against him. He still thought this was just another argument, that she was here to plead, to demand answers, to threaten divorce, but Ava wasn't here to argue. She was here to end this. She smiled, tilting her head slightly, and in a calm voice she said, "Check your phone, Ethan." His smirk faltered for the first time. With a flicker of confusion, he pulled his phone from his pocket. As he scrolled through the notifications, Ava watched the color drain from his face. First, there was the emergency injunction from international conservation authorities halting the sale of her stolen artifacts. Then, a freeze on several of his offshore accounts, flagged for suspicious activity linked to illegal artifact trafficking. And finally, a warrant for questioning from the Australian authorities, courtesy of Detective Lancaster, who had been quietly building a case against him for months. Ava leaned in, lowering her voice just enough so only he could hear. You didn't just betray me, Ethan. You broke the law. And now? You're out of time. Ethan's hands clenched around his phone. You think you've won? He hissed. You have no idea who you're messing with. Ava only smiled, relishing the flicker of fear in his eyes. Actually, I do. I spent years thinking I could fix you, that I could make you care about something other than yourself. But you're nothing without your lies. And now they're crumbling. Before Ethan could respond, the auction hall erupted into chaos. Security guards moved in, whispers turned to shouts, and Victor Lau himself, furious at the disruption, was ordering staff to escort people out. But it was too late. The authorities had been tipped off. Ava stepped back, watching as 2 Singaporean law enforcement officers approached Ethan, their expressions unreadable. Ethan Caldwell, we need you to come with us. For the first time in his life, Ethan had no escape plan, no clever excuse, no legal loophole, no power left to manipulate. As he was led away, he threw one last glare over his shoulder. This isn't over, Ava. But she simply stood there, unshaken. Oh, it is. And this time, you're the one who lost everything. The moment Ethan was escorted out of the auction hall, Ava felt a weight lift off her shoulders, not just the burden of his betrayal, but of years of manipulation, arrogance, and broken promises. He had spent their entire marriage convincing her that his ambition was their future, that his ruthlessness was just business, that she was too sentimental, too naive to understand the real world. But in the end, it wasn't her who didn't understand. It was him. Back in Sydney, the fallout from Ethan's crime spread quickly. His accounts were frozen, his company faced multiple fraud investigations, and his business partners distanced themselves as his empire crumbled. He wasn't just losing his wealth, he was losing his reputation, the one thing he had always valued above all else. Detective Lancaster confirmed that he would likely face charges for illegal artifact trafficking, environmental fraud, and money laundering. There was no easy way out. But the greatest victory of all came when Ava recovered her stolen artifacts. With Celeste's help, international conservation agencies secured the return of nearly every piece, and those that had been damaged were transferred to marine preservation labs for restoration. As Ava carefully placed each relic back where it belonged, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Instead of mourning what Ethan had taken, she focused on what she had reclaimed, not just her artifacts, but her independence, her purpose, and her future. She had spent years in his shadow, compromising, conceding, forgiving, but now, for the first time, her life was entirely her own. At a small gathering in Celeste's lab, Ava, Jasper, Margot, and Detective Lancaster toasted to her victory. "So what's next for Ava Sinclair?" Jasper asked with a grin, raising his glass. Ava smiled, looking out at the ocean beyond the windows. "Anything I want." And for the first time, she truly meant it. At its core, Ava Sinclair's journey is a lesson in self-worth, resilience, and the power of fighting for what truly matters. Throughout her relationship with Ethan, she compromised, believing that love required sacrifice and understanding, but in reality, it was respect and integrity that mattered most. Ethan's betrayal showed her that some people will always take without remorse, but it also proved that she was stronger than she ever realized. Ava's story highlights the importance of trusting your instincts and standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult. Ethan expected her to stay silent, to accept the loss, but instead she took action, reclaiming not just her artifacts, but her independence and dignity. It's a powerful reminder that when faced with betrayal and injustice, the real victory isn't just about getting revenge, it's about taking back control and refusing to let someone else define your worth. Most importantly, Ava learned that she was never truly powerless. She had the intelligence, the network, and the strength to fight back. And by doing so, she didn't just win, she freed herself from a life she had outgrown, stepping into a future where she made the rules.